From New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, this is Democracy Now! As much of the United States remains on lockdown, abortion rights are under attack nationwide. We'll get an update on the fight for abortion access with Alexis McGill-Johnson, acting president and CEO of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. We'll also speak with the director and writer of a powerful new dramatic film called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, that follows a 17-year-old girl as she travels from Pennsylvania to New York City to get an abortion without having to notify her parents.
I'm just not ready to be a mom.
Where else could you go?
Nowhere in Pennsylvania.
I think you should try another place.
Then President Trump dangerously suggests injecting disinfectants could help patients sick with the coronavirus.
And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
After Trump's remarks, governors reported a spike in phone calls about taking disinfectants. We'll look at what we know about the most touted drugs tested for COVID-19 with Tanya Lewis, Associate Editor for Health and Medicine at Scientific American. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The worldwide death toll from the novel coronavirus has topped 207,000, with around 3 million confirmed cases across the globe. More than a quarter of the deaths have been here in the United States, where the recorded death toll has topped 55,000, but the actual number is believed to be significantly higher. In Europe, Spain, Italy, and France, 3 of the countries worst hit by the pandemic, they are starting to loosen some restrictions as indicators of the coronavirus toll continues to tend downwards. In Spain, children under the age of 14 were allowed outside for the first time in 6 weeks Sunday. Under the relaxed rules, they're allowed to leave home for up to 1 hour per day with a parent wearing masks. Italy, which has the second highest confirmed death toll after the United States, says manufacturing could restart as soon as next Monday, though schools will remain closed until the fall. Here in the United States, the White House's coronavirus task force coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, said Sunday social distancing will likely last through the summer, even as a growing number of states are preparing to reopen parts of the economy. Restaurants and theaters in Georgia will be allowed to reopen starting today, after other businesses started opening their doors in Georgia last week, including massage and tattoo parlors and nail and hair salons. Some parts of Texas are also allowing restaurants to start serving eat-in dinners, as Governor Greg Abbott is expected to announce a further loosening of restrictions for the state today. Colorado announced a new safer at-home policy as elective surgeries and retail businesses with curbside delivery will be allowed to resume. This is Democratic Colorado Governor Jared Polis speaking on CNN Sunday.
We have to make the best informed decisions based on data and science with the information we have. What we know is that what matters a lot more than the date that the stay-at-home ends is what we do going forward and how we have an ongoing, sustainable way, psychologically, economically, and from a health perspective, to have the social distancing we need at workplace, where people recreate, and across the board.
Denver Mayor Michael Hancock, however, extended Denver's stay-at-home order till May 8th, saying more testing and tracing of the coronavirus is needed before reopening. There are over 1,300 confirmed cases of coronavirus in Colorado, with close to 700 reported deaths. Here in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo said construction and manufacturing in less affected parts of the state may be able to open after May 15th, when the state's lockdown order is set to expire. Meanwhile, Governor Cuomo warns New York will soon have to slash aid to local governments by over $8 billion, while cutting state agency budgets by 10% unless Congress agrees to a bailout. Last week, Senate Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell drew outrage from governors around the country when he suggested state governments should declare bankruptcy rather than receive hundreds of billions of dollars in federal aid. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its list of possible symptoms for the novel coronavirus this weekend to include chills, repeated shaking with chills, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, and a loss of taste or smell. Doctors around the country are reporting an alarming number of young and middle-aged people infected with COVID-19 have been dying of strokes, including those who barely presented other symptoms of the disease. In Oakland, California, video showing outreach workers for the city's unhoused population pinned to the ground and arrested by police has prompted outrage. The outreach workers, who are themselves unhoused, have been distributing water, food, and supplies to those in need. Police later admitted they thought one of the targeted individuals, a black man, matched the description of a suspect in a local crime. The fallout continues from President Trump's dangerous suggestion last week that injecting disinfectants could help patients sick with COVID-19. Governors and other state officials around the country have reported a spike in phone calls about taking disinfectants after Trump's remarks Thursday. This is Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan speaking on ABC News.
When misinformation comes out, or you just say something that pops in your head, it does send a wrong message. And we had hundreds of calls come into our emergency hotline at our health department asking if it was right to ingest Clorox or alcohol cleaning products, whether that was going to help them fight the virus. So we had to put out that warning to make sure that people were not doing something like that, which would kill people.
Trump attempted to walk back his comments Friday, saying he was being sarcastic. He suggested on Twitter this weekend that he might stop holding daily coronavirus briefings following the recent backlash, saying they're, quote, not worth the time and effort. Meanwhile, the FDA had to issue warnings against people self-medicating with anti-malarial drugs chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine Friday after multiple deaths and poisonings were reported. President Trump has repeatedly touted these drugs, telling Americans to try it. The World Health Organization is cautioning governments against issuing so-called immunity passports, warning there's no evidence people who've recovered from COVID-19 are immune to reinfection. Chile has said, however, it will move forward issuing certificates to people who've recovered from COVID-19, allowing them to resume work. On Saturday, thousands of people took part in a Cancel the Rent Car protest around the country. The action was organized by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. This is a protester speaking in Los Angeles.
Democrats and Republicans pass legislation which bail out the banks and not the people. And that's why we're here today. They've been telling us for years, that we don't have the money, that we don't have the power to bail out the people. But somehow, in crisis, when the economy has to shut down, when capitalism has to take a back seat, the workers become the essential class.
Activists have been calling for a moratorium on rents for the duration of the coronavirus crisis as unemployment numbers continue to surge. President Trump signed off on the latest $484 billion coronavirus relief bill Friday, but neither of the relief bills passed so far includes any assistance for people struggling to pay rent. The Congressional Budget Office is projecting unemployment rate in the U.S. will remain high for at least the next 18 months as the U.S. recovers from the pandemic. The unemployment rate is projected to be at 10% at the end of 2021, higher than other times, and a small correction, higher than the Great Recession of 2008, and is expected to be between 14 and, let's see, 16% through the fall of this year, though some analyses of the true rate of unemployment put that number much higher. And a small correction from above, there are over 13,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus in Colorado, with close to 700 reported deaths. In Washington state, 111 workers at a Tyson Foods meat processing plant have tested positive for COVID-19. It's the latest in a series of outbreaks which have forced the closure of 15 U.S. meatpacking plants operated by Tyson, Smithfield, and JBS, which have slashed U.S. meat production by at least 25%. Meanwhile, an industry trade group in Delaware says a major poultry processor recently killed 2 million chickens and disposed of their carcasses after labor shortages left it unable to process the birds for the market. John Tyson, chair of the board of Tyson Foods, warned in a full-page ad in several newspapers Sunday, quote, "The food supply chain is breaking." New evidence has surfaced that may help corroborate a claim by a former staffer of Joe Biden who says he sexually assaulted her in 1993. Tara Reade publicly accused Biden just last month, but says she first told her mother and a few others about the incident shortly after it happened. Over the weekend, archival video emerged of Reade's late mother anonymously calling into the Larry King Show on CNN in 1993 and making a reference to what happened to her daughter.
Hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Tara Reade has confirmed the voice of the caller was her mother, who died in 2016. Joe Biden's campaign has denied Reade's sexual assault claim, calling her allegation untrue. In other news about Joe Biden, progressive organizations, Sunrise Movement, and Justice Democrats are demanding Biden remove Larry Summers as an economic advisor. Larry Summers' legacy is advocating for policies that contributed to the skyrocketing inequality and climate crisis we're living with today, the groups said. Summers previously worked in the Clinton and Obama administrations. He's also been tied to convicted sexual predator and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. The Biden campaign says Summers is part of an informal network of experts and does not hold a formal position in the campaign. In Texas, the last remaining patient from the mass shooting at an El Paso Walmart last August has died. Guillermo Garcia and his wife were both shot multiple times during the rampage, but his wife survived. Shortly before the massacre, Patrick Cusius published a racist online manifesto echoing President Trump's rhetoric about invasion of immigrants. In Saudi Arabia, renowned human rights advocate Abdullah al-Hamid has reportedly died in jail. Al-Hamid co-founded the Saudi Civil and Political Rights Association and was awarded the 2018 Right Livelihood Award. He'd been in prison since 2013 for his activism and had been in a coma after having a stroke earlier this month. Ole Van Ushkel, the executive director of the Right Livelihood Foundation, said, quote, "He's paid the ultimate price for his convictions. We hold Saudi authorities directly responsible for Hamid's death, as they have deliberately denied him access to proper medical care for many months during his imprisonment," unquote. The news comes as Amnesty International reports Saudi Arabia executed 184 people last year, a record for the country. Yemen's facing a new political crisis. On Sunday, separatists in southern Yemen declared self-rule in the port city of Aden and nearby provinces. The separatists have the backing of the United Arab Emirates. The Saudi-backed Yemeni government blasted the move, warning of dangerous and catastrophic consequences. The two factions had been on the same side in the U.S.-backed war against the Houthi rebels. This comes as the United Nations is attempting to secure a nationwide truce in a bid to contain the coronavirus. Brazil's powerful justice minister has resigned, accusing far-right President Jair Bolsonaro of illegally firing the federal police chief. Sergio Moro became the 8th cabinet member and the most high-profile to depart in the 15 months since Bolsonaro took office. Moro once oversaw a vast anti-corruption investigation known as Operation Car Wash and prosecuted former President Lula da Silva for alleged corruption, charges that Lula says were politically motivated and designed to keep him from running for the presidency again. Moro quit on Friday, just hours after Bolsonaro fired the federal police chief who was investigating Bolsonaro's political allies and 2 of his sons. Flavio Bolsonaro is under investigation for corruption and ties to mafia in Rio de Janeiro. Another son, Carlos Bolsonaro, is charged with leading a criminal fake news racket that's made threats against political opponents while spreading defamatory misinformation. This all comes as President Bolsonaro faces widespread criticism for minimizing the dangers of the coronavirus outbreak. The death toll in Brazil has topped 4,000, and hospitals report being overwhelmed with sick patients. In environmental news, new research finds populations of land-dwelling insects around the world have plummeted by about 25% over the last 3 decades. Publishing in the journal Science, German researchers blame the drop in arthropods on a critical loss of habitat driven by urbanization and deforestation. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the coronavirus continues to spread and much of the United States remains on lockdown, abortion rights are under attack across the country. States including Alabama, Iowa, Louisiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and more have all attempted to restrict access to abortion as part of their response to the pandemic. Abortions in Texas were briefly effectively banned last week after a federal appeals court ruled Monday that the state could restrict abortion services as it responds to the pandemic. The Washington Post called the move the most extreme shutdown of abortion access allowed by federal courts since the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision declared access to abortion a constitutional right, unquote. But Wednesday, Republican Governor Greg Abbott issued a new executive order loosening the restrictions on medical procedures and allowing abortion services to proceed. The fight over abortion access has sparked a prolonged legal battle and for weeks forced people seeking abortions to leave the state of Texas to receive medical care. Planned Parenthood reported a 706% increase in abortion appointments for people crossing state lines from Texas to providers in Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada. To look at the ongoing fight for abortion access in Texas, as well as other states, we're joined by Alexis McGill-Johnson, the acting president and CEO of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She's joining us from New York City, from her own home to stop community spread. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Alexis.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
It's great to have you with us. Well, why don't you just give us a nationwide survey of what's happening to abortion access in the United States?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, as you talked earlier, we've already seen how COVID has laid bare the challenges in our public healthcare infrastructure, seeing how many people, particularly low income, people of color, who are experiencing the disproportionate impact of this care. And at the same time that we are all grappling with what it means to live in this pandemic, a number of governors across the country have decided that this pandemic was the right time to create executive orders to restrict more access to abortion. And what we've seen is the impact. We've seen people continue to get in their cars to drive thousands of miles to Colorado, to California, to New Mexico, just out of Texas, to seek access to medication abortion, which is just 2 pills taken over 24 hours. And, we've been in a pushback and a legal pushback with a number of states, as well as with our circuit court judges. And there's been an incredible emotional whiplash related to it, as our providers have been calling patients and telling them that their appointments are now canceled, or that they in fact have to seek another method. And so this is really unconscionable, the fact that people would use a pandemic to restrict access to healthcare, when in fact we should be trying to identify ways to expand healthcare.
So let's talk, for example, about Texas, the battle that's been going on in the courts. And this happens, in other places as well, in Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, as the governor attempts to restrict abortion and what's happening at the court level, one after another decisions.
We were at the court like over 4 times in the last couple of weeks with our partners on the ground, and essentially where we are now is that the governor is trying to loosen the restriction. In fact, because he's trying to open the state, which shows you that that this was just a sham to begin with, right? That the real concern around spreading access to spreading COVID, using abortion as a guise for that really is not legitimate. And so right now we have a loosened restriction in Texas, but there are other states where we're continuing to fight.
Can you talk about Alabama, what's happening there? The preliminary injunction that treats abortion like all medical care, allowing physicians to provide abortion using their medical judgment.
Yes, I mean, I'm not in terms of all the specifics with respect to Alabama and with Tennessee. I think it is we're using every everything at our measure, in sense that, right, we have to be able to defend access to abortion in these various states with these executive orders coming down. And what we're trying to do is ensure that that people seeking abortion get access as immediately as they can. And so, I think when you look back in the bigger picture, what you're seeing is a number of restrictions around abortion. Just last year, there were 300 restrictions that were introduced in 47 states across the country. And so, what we're looking at is an infrastructure that has really tried to limit access to abortion. And when you layer a pandemic on top of that, we're feeling, obviously the impact of that. Many states, there are 5 states now that are essentially abortion deserts, where it's very difficult to access, and we're adding these additional restrictions on it, which makes it even more unsustainable.
And explain what you referred to as medication abortion. Explain, you've got the surgery, the procedure, and you've got the double pill.
Yes, medication abortion is offered earlier in the gestational period, and it really requires just 2 pills that the person seeking abortion would take within a 24-hour period, and so this is not a procedure that requires an extensive amount of PPE. It doesn't require in many cases, we're able to see a patient now with the expansion of telehealth via Skype like this, intake the patient, and then drive, and that patient will come and pick up the prescription and go home and take that medication safely at home. And then we were able to do follow-up care, again, via telehealth, in much the same way that the rest of the country is operating right now on telehealth, telemedicine. And so, what we're seeing is our patients are driving, again, 1,000 miles. Think about this. Women are the majority of healthcare workers. We're the majority of people homeschooling right now. We are the majority of essential workers. Our bodies have literally been deemed essential, and yet our bodies, the control of our bodies and the right to control our own bodies has not. And so we're seeing them drive thousands of miles to get 2 pills and then get back in a car and drive another 1,000 miles back home through these various states in ways that are incredibly unsafe.
Alexis McGill-Johnson, you co-authored a piece for Essence magazine last week, headlined, "Your job is deemed essential, but your abortion is not. Black, low-wage women in Texas are being robbed of their humanity." In it, you wrote, quote, "Non-white women are more likely to hold jobs deemed essential than any other demographic. Even though your job has been deemed essential, your humanity, your ability to earn a living wage, your ability to access health care, pandemic or not, is not. And now in the state of Texas and several others, your legal ability to access abortion is currently up in the air for a court to decide." Explain the demographics that you're talking about, and talk about women of color accessing abortion being even more challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really what we've seen in the public health infrastructure around COVID, right? We've seen just the number of deaths, right? COVID is touching all of us, regardless of age and class and race. And yet the folks who are dying, the folks who are being most subjected to fatality are largely Black and Latinx in major urban areas. And this challenge, right, that our access to public healthcare infrastructure has already been challenged. And then you layer on bias, you layer on patterns and systems of discrimination over centuries, quite frankly, that have concluded in the fact that we are, particularly women of color, are the ones who are not able to to get the right amount of care. So when you layer on other challenges around Black maternal mortality, regardless of income, our bodies literally are much more subject to dying during childbirth or just thereafter because of the bias built into discrimination in the system. And when I look at these executive orders in states that are the same states that did not expand Medicaid, states who have been layering on these restrictions largely for affecting low-income women of color, to me, it's no surprise that we're the ones being called in. We're the ones who are being asked to be essential workers, and yet our ability to actually control our own bodies and to really control our own futures and freedom is being denied by the state.
And can you talk about the issue of women getting access, what you recommend where access is challenged? I mean, even before the pandemic, the closing of women's health clinics, so often you can have a situation where there's only one or two in a state. And this new service that you are now offering, telehealth services, offering information about sexual and reproductive health.
Yes, absolutely. It is actually a silver lining in this pandemic that Planned Parenthood, including and many of other health providers, have actually been able to really lean into telehealth infrastructure and provide service. I think the quote was something like, "We've moved 10 years in 10 days," and that is actually the fact that we will be in all 50 states by the end of this month to provide access to STI screenings, to family planning, to HIV, PEP, and PrEP, and in much the same way as I said, to provide some wraparound service around getting access to abortion. That's given us a lifeline into communities, particularly areas where the shelter-in-place bans are going to continue, as well as rural areas where there may not be access to health care broadly. But again, this is a silver lining for some, and again, in many states, the challenge to COVID is essentially accelerating a big concern that we should all have about the impact, not just of Roe being overturned, but literally of watching it being gutted by these restrictions year after year after year over the last decade in particular. And so we have to think about how we're going to support, how we're going to get the 25 million women who live in states that are increasingly restrictive access to safe and legal abortion should they need it. And that's currently the planning that we're working on right now.
Alexis McGill-Johnson, we want to ask you to stay with us as we move into our next segment. Alexis McGill-Johnson is acting president and CEO of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. When we come back, as multiple states try to restrict access to abortion during the pandemic, we're going to look at a powerful new dramatic film that follows a 17-year-old girl as she travels from her small town in Pennsylvania to New York City to get an abortion without having to notify her parents. The film is called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Stay with us. Intermezzo by the Met Orchestra. That's the orchestra of the Metropolitan Opera in New York, which performed remotely together over the weekend as part of their at-home gala. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As multiple states try to further restrict access to abortion during the pandemic, we're turning now to a powerful new dramatic film that follows a 17-year-old girl as she travels from her small town in Pennsylvania to New York City to get an abortion without having to notify her parents. Autumn Callahan is played by Sydney Flanagan in an incredible debut performance. This is the trailer for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always.
I didn't see you at school today.
I went to the doctor.
What's wrong?
Girl problems.
Don't you ever just wish you were a dude?
All the time.
This is the most magical sound you will ever hear.
I'm just not ready to be a mom.
Where else could you go?
Nowhere in Pennsylvania.
I think you should try another place.
Going to New York? What are you doing there?
Seeing family and stuff.
Who came with you today?
My cousin.
Do you have a place to stay tonight? I know you came from far away.
I'll figure it out.
This area is closed. Do not sleep here.
Where's the rest of the money?
I want to make sure that you're safe. I know this is hard. I'm going to ask you some questions. They can be really personal. Just answer either never, rarely, sometimes, or always.
That's the trailer for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, a new independent film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January to rave reviews. And, well, it was supposed to hit theaters in March, just as they were closing in response to the pandemic. Now the film is available online for at-home viewing. For more, we're joined by the film's director and writer, Eliza Hittman. Eliza, congratulations on this deeply moving, profound film. You could never have predicted what would happen with this pandemic when your film hit, and yet it is so instructive for what women face today and young people. Take us on the journey of your film, why you decided to do this, a young woman making this journey to get an abortion because of restrictions on choice in her home community.
Yeah, I first started thinking about this film in 2012 after reading about the death of Savita Halappanavar in Ireland. And just to educate myself, I began, reading about the history of the Eighth Amendment in Ireland, but also thinking a lot about how restrictive, each state can be in the United States. And I was thinking about the journey that women take from rural areas into urban areas when they can't get access. And for me, there's something so powerful and heroic about that journey. And I began to ask myself, why haven't I seen it represented on film before? So many times films about abortion, tend to focus on, the moral dilemma. But I thought it could be a really powerful story to explore how hard it is to get a legal abortion in in contemporary America. So I began to do research and a personal, investigation of the issues. So I went to different pregnancy care centers in rural Pennsylvania and took pregnancy tests and took counseling sessions. And I consulted with Planned Parenthood in New York. And I just tried to educate myself as best possible about, what the impact of these restrictive barriers look like on a young woman's woman's life.
In this scene from Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Skylar asks her cousin Autumn why she wasn't in school.
I saw you weren't at school today.
I went to the doctor.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
What's wrong?
Girl problems?
Bad cramps.
Yeah.
I get those too. Pretty much run through a bottle of painkillers like every month.
Yeah, same.
Don't you ever just wish you were a dude?
All the time.
So in this scene from Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, I'm going to play yet another clip. Autumn goes to what's called a crisis pregnancy center, which tells her that her pregnancy test is positive.
That looks like a positive.
If it's positive, is there any way it could be negative?
No. A positive is always a positive.
So Eliza Hittman, talk about this so-called pregnancy crisis center that Autumn finds in her town.
Yeah, I really wanted to put myself in the shoes of the character, and I asked myself, like, if I lived in this small town and I chose a town, what would I have access to if I was a young woman in crisis? And I went into the local pregnancy care center, and I signed in and I took a test, and I really went through the dialogue that the character goes through in the film. And what struck me most from clinic to clinic is that the women who work there, they aren't, licensed medical physicians. They're just layman volunteers who, have a very specific religious agenda, and, the services that they offered, aren't legitimate or medical.
And this is very clear in the film when they try to scare her with a film. And then, this film isn't a documentary. This is a feature dramatic film. And the research you did about the journey that Autumn takes from Pennsylvania, and again, this is a story of a young woman, a 17-year-old, who is in Pennsylvania, one of 37 states that requires parental involvement for minors seeking abortion. She doesn't feel comfortable telling her parents, so she makes her way with her cousin to New York City. You went on this journey yourself?
I did. I took the only Greyhound bus that left from the town in Pennsylvania, and I really, got a chance to sort of absorb the landscapes that would be around the character, and, came in through Port Authority and tried to document my own experiences and filter them almost through the eyes of the character. Because it was important for me, that the film be grounded in authenticity and credibility. And I didn't want to just sort of write from what I had read online or in books, and wanted to have a firsthand experience with the issues that the film explores.
Now I wanted to go to a clip that, brings in the title of your film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. You actually filmed this at the Planned Parenthood Clinic in New York. Here, a Planned Parenthood Clinic staff member in New York City, a woman who plays her, asks Autumn a number of questions about her life.
All right, so I'm going to ask you some questions. They can be really personal, and all you have to do is answer either never, rarely, sometimes, or always. It's kind of like multiple choice, but it's not a test.
Okay.
Okay. In the past year, your partner has refused to wear a condom. Never, rarely, sometimes, always.
Sometimes.
Okay. And your partner messes with your birth control or tries to get you pregnant when you don't want to be. Never, rarely, sometimes, always.
Never.
Okay. Your partner's threatened or frightened you. Never, rarely, sometimes, always.
Why are you asking me this?
I want to make sure that you're safe. Your partner's threatened or frightened you? Never? Rarely? Sometimes? Always?
Rarely.
Okay. Your partner has hit you, slapped you, or physically hurt you? Never? Rarely? Sometimes? Always? Has your partner ever hit you, slapped you, or physically hurt you? Is someone hurting you? It's okay. It's just a couple more questions, all right? Your partner has made you have sex when you didn't want to? Never? Rarely? Sometimes? Always? It's okay. I want to make sure you're safe, and I want to help you if I can. I have just one more question for you, okay, Autumn? Has anyone forced you into a sexual act ever in your lifetime, yes or no?
Yeah.
That's a clip from Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. The director and writer is Eliza Hittman. This is a deeply emotional, powerful moment at the core of your film, Eliza. In the Planned Parenthood clinic in New York, she's taken this journey. She has had to wait in New York City with her cousin. Talk more about what the dangers that young women and any woman faces if they can't be in their own town and do a film, and the core of this moment.
For me, this character has been, navigating these very deeply complex, personal, intimate issues alone. Even though her cousin is with her, and she has, support, of a friend and a peer who's non-judgmental, the core of what she's dealing with alone. And this is, a pivotal moment in the film, where in, the safety of a counselor's office, she breaks down from the journey of what she's been through. And I think that when, women don't have access, when they don't have proper sex education, when they don't have resources and money, they are, left to navigate a very complex, bureaucratic, legal system, reproductive system alone. And this is, an important moment in the film. And she's crumbling. We shot that scene in Margaret Sanger, with the generosity of Planned Parenthood allowing us to use their facilities. And actually the counselor who's acting with her in the scene is a trained counselor who trained at Planned Parenthood, but I met at Choices Clinic in Queens.
And Alexis McGill-Johnson, before you go, have you gotten an increased number of reports of women having to travel these long distances, or any specific story in this country of what's happening to women right now?
Yes, absolutely. And, I think that what Eliza has done here in bringing this film to life through narrative is so reflective of what we've seen, not just in the last few weeks around these executive orders, but what we've really honestly been seeing over the last few years as these restrictions go into place in these various states. And whether or not, while many of them are being appealed, there's still a tremendous amount of confusion around the restrictions. We're seeing women who, have to find childcare. They have to, do exactly as Autumn does, find a friend who will travel with them, will go the journey, who may not have the resources to pay for the procedure, much less, pay for a hotel room. And I think that challenge of what we're seeing is being more intensified over the last month with these executive orders. And, Eliza could not have predicted that art would imitate life so quickly. But it's such an important film for us to really grapple with the amount of restrictions that women are facing.
Will send more and more women to having later abortions because of their fear right now of going to hospitals or being told that that abortion is not essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw it just in Louisiana, as you know, the Supreme Court is reviewing a case right now. And I talked to a woman who very similarly went to a crisis pregnancy center, was promised over and over again that they would help her get access to an abortion, and pushed her much later into her pregnancy until a point where she had to seek a surgical abortion. And so the stigmatization, the shaming of women, not just of providers and organizations like Planned Parenthood, shaming women around their need to seek an abortion, I think is also something really important and powerful that this film really brings out.
Finally, Eliza Hittman, can you talk about what it means for this film to come out now? I mean, you expected, movie theaters around the country to be running this film. It has just had rave reviews, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reviews. And yet it comes at this time. In one sense, it may mean access to more people all over the globe seeing it. Also at a time when the film festivals, one after another, are being canceled, or it looks like they might be, from the Toronto International Film Festival to the Sundance Film Festival. What does this all mean for you as a director and a writer? A different kind of access. You're having Q&As online, virtual meetings with young women around the country. I watched one when you were talking to young women in Utah that was run by the Planned Parenthood there.
Mm-hmm. We didn't expect theaters to shutter in the middle of our, in the beginning of our theatrical release, but we had to pivot and, think about how the film could still reach audiences at this very pivotal, this very vulnerable moment. And because of, everything that's happening in the states that we talked about, we felt like it was an opportunity to try and push the film, into the homes of young women who might be like Autumn, who are, very much alone with this issue and without access. So, the film's urgency tragically increases, and we hope that people are able to access it online, and we are doing a lot of grassroots outreach with Planned Parenthood and an organization called CineReach to make sure that young people can see it, because they are the audience that I made the film for.
Well, Eliza Hittman, congratulations on this film, hitting at a very, to say the least, unusual time. But a film like this, critical to be seen at this time. Eliza Hittman is writer and director of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And I want to thank Alexis McGill-Johnson, acting president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we look at what's being tested now. What are the drugs to deal with COVID-19? What should we understand this coming as the fallout from President Trump suggesting that maybe disinfectants should be ingested or injected into the human body? A very dangerous suggestion that now poison centers around the country are having to deal with. Stay with us. The Met Orchestra and Chorus of the Metropolitan Opera this weekend as part of its at-home gala. Yes, they were performing together alone, all in their homes. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. More than 207,000 people have died worldwide from COVID-19, but there are still no drugs proven to help treat the disease. This comes out as fallout continues from President Trump's dangerous suggestion last week that injecting or ingesting disinfectants could help patients get better.
And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
After President Trump's remarks on Thursday, governors and other state officials reported a spike in phone calls about taking disinfectants. Trump attempted to walk back his comments, saying he was being sarcastic, but everyone saw the videotape. Meanwhile, the FDA has issued warnings against people self-medicating with anti-malarial drugs, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine medications. Again, President Trump also erroneously recommended after multiple deaths and poisonings were reported. For more, we're joined by Tanya Lewis, Associate Editor for Health and Medicine at Scientific American, whose recent piece is headlined, "Here's What We Know About the Most Touted Drugs Tested for COVID-19." Tanya, welcome to Democracy Now! Start off by just responding to this latest presidential suggestion and the horror of it for states around the country that reported hundreds and hundreds of people calling in to say, is it okay to inject or ingest Clorox or Lysol?
I mean, as you mentioned, the president's comments, really just they were not really based in any sort of scientific evidence. There's actually a lot of danger in injecting these types of substances into the body. So I'm not quite sure what the president was referring to exactly, but those disinfectants are definitely recommended for use on surfaces, not on the human body or in the human body.
So, Tanya Lewis, can you talk about what is being looked at right now for people to understand? For example, another drug that he recommended was hydroxychloroquine. And yet the studies had not been done. Talk about the latest round of studies that have just begun, results of which have just begun to come out.
Sure. So as you mentioned, the drugs hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine are both anti-malarial drugs that are also used sometimes for rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, which are autoimmune disorders. But they are now being tested in clinical trials for COVID-19 because there is some suggestion that they might work as an antiviral or to prevent replication of the virus, as well as to affect the immune system and kind of prevent that sort of runaway immune reaction that we see in some of the most severe cases. But as it stands right now, those clinical trials are ongoing. There have been a few studies that have come out, but these were not randomized clinical trials. So basically, in order to show any kind of benefit, you really need to have a randomized trial.
And explain what randomized means.
Sure. So that just means that you're giving a random subset of patients the drug and a random subset a placebo. So that way you can kind of really compare the effect of the drug.
So they don't know if they're getting the actual drug or they're getting the placebo, like nothing, a fake. And it's very hard to do that, right? If patients are sick and the president recommends a drug could save you, it's very hard to have them be willing to join a randomized study where they might not actually get the drug.
Exactly. And that's the concern here, is that if you give patients the choice, most of the time they will say, yes, give me the drug, because there really isn't anything else available. So in order to really show that there's a benefit or not, we really need to have these types of randomized trials.
I want to turn to Stat News, which recently reported that the summary of a study of the antiviral drug remdesivir was inadvertently posted to the website of the World Health Organization Thursday. According to the results, results, which were quickly removed from the site, the drug, quote, failed to speed the improvement of patients with COVID-19 or prevent them from dying, unquote. The drug's manufacturer, Gilead Sciences, which President Trump has also touted, refuted the results, saying the data suggested a potential benefit. World Health Organization spokesperson Daniela Bagozzi told Stat News a draft manuscript was provided by the authors to WHO and inadvertently posted on the website and taken down as soon as the mistake was noticed. The manuscript is now undergoing peer review, and we're waiting for a final version before WHO comments on it. Tanya Lewis, talk about remdesivir and what we know so far.
Sure. So remdesivir is another antiviral drug that is supposed to work by interfering with the virus's replication. And it was originally developed for Ebola, but was later decided, they decided not to use it because it wasn't as effective as some of the other treatments. But it was found to be effective against many other coronaviruses like SARS and MERS in mice and in cell culture. So this is a potentially promising candidate, but as you mentioned, some of the early data that was leaked may suggest that it may not have much of a benefit and may not decrease the risk of death. Of course, I have to say that those data have not yet been made widely available and are not, peer-reviewed and vetted. So it's hard to sort of comment on that data without seeing the full data, but we'll just have to wait and see in the coming weeks when the official data is released how effective it really is or not.
If you could talk about what convalescent plasma is.
Sure. So that's another potential treatment that is being tested. It's basically when you take the blood plasma, it's everything except for the red blood cells. And you take the plasma from somebody who's recovered from the disease, in this case COVID-19, and put that plasma into a patient who's currently battling the virus. And then the idea is that the antibodies from that first patient will help the current patient sort of fight off the virus. But this is still, again, fairly preliminary. There are some trials going on now. And at this point, we'll just have to kind of see, but it's a potentially promising avenue of treatment.
And can you, in the last 30 seconds we have, talk about the FDA now just approving home kits. Now, are these for COVID-19 just to test if you have it, or are they for antibodies?
So there are actually both kinds of tests. The ones that I'm more familiar with are the RNA or PCR-based tests, which are basically to tell whether or not you currently have COVID-19. And just to clarify, these at-home test kits are actually test collection kits. So you just collect a sample with the nasal swab and then send that off to the lab to be tested.
And the reliability of this? We have 10 seconds.
Sure. So it's, at this point it's pretty early, but we think that they are fairly reliable. But again, there's always a risk that if you're not swabbing correctly, maybe you would have a false negative.
Well, Tanya Lewis, I want to thank you for being with us, Associate Editor for Health and Medicine at Scientific American. We'll link to your piece. Here's what we know about the most touted drugs tested for COVID-19. And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is working with as few people on site as possible. The majority of our amazing team is working from home. I'm Amy Goodman. This is the Quarantine Report. Thanks so much for joining us.